Keyboard switches with highly tactile bumps that are in stock back in the day were hard to find, until the Zealios came into the scene, or at least in the little research I did all the way back in 2018. Now that there are many other switches out, is it in with the new and out with the old, or are the Zealios still worth using for both gaming and productivity, aka general typing? The purple stem is almost a pastel purple, which I find enjoyable. As you can see on the housing, it does say Gateron because it's manufactured by them, but the design is from Zeal. As much as I love having specific colorways on my switches, I do still prefer the translucent RGB housing since it turns these switches into almost any color I would like, even matching or contrasting the keycaps on them. For compatibility, they are a 5-pin design. When I first got into the mechanical keyboard hobby, I did have to clip off the 2 plastic legs. However, these days, even hot swap gaming keyboards tend to have 5-pin support. Thank goodness. Now, how does it actually feel to type on? There is practically no pre-chow, with a bump right from the start of the press. The tactility I would describe as rounded and highly obvious. There is almost no ignoring the tactility, and it would be difficult to slowly press down on the switch without accidentally bottoming out. But the tactility can disappear into the background after daily driving it for quite a while, where it's not fatiguing even after hours of typing. At the starting force of 62 grams, the Zealios bottom outs at a sharp, crisp feel, while retaining the rounded tactile bump. They are noticeably scratchy compared to more recent switches when they aren't lubed. But the scratchiness isn't distracting. What was a little distracting was there was quite a few switches that had some pinny springs to them. All I do with those switches is move them to a part of the keyboard that isn't used too often, such as pipe, caps lock, and even the number row. I do prefer heavy switches and silent switches personally, which is why I lube these Zealios to tone down the sound and smooth out some of that scratchiness. I can still feel the scratchiness, but it is definitely smoother. More of a matte feel type of scratchiness, a rough velvet feel for lack of a better term. There is texture, but it doesn't mean it's rough. Despite being on the heavier side at 62 grams, I do find them to be lighter than I would like personally because I'm a relatively heavy typist, and the bottom out is harsher than I would like, probably because I've gotten used to heavier switches. Before getting into how the Zealios sound, how are they in gaming? The Zealios aren't made for gaming, but it doesn't do worse than a mainstream switch. Despite being heavier than most speed switches, which is at 55 or less grams, it doesn't give me fatigue over a long period of time. I have to caveat though, I used to main switches that are 78 grams, and they did fatigue me when in gaming. I have used the Zealios in 3 to 4 hour gaming sessions without any issues. That's after a day's work of about 8 hours. What I did find is that with slightly heavier tactile switches, it is much harder to make incorrect presses. If you tend to bump into adjacent switches, this can make the 62 gram Zealios a better choice than a speed switch. Now for the sound test, both lubed and unlubed. I do prefer the sound when it's lubed with a slightly lower pitch and cleaner sound, whereas per usual I find that the sound is a little too hollow when it isn't lubed. While the sound of the switches can be a reason to buy a specific switch, there are people like me who would rather have a silent keyboard, which you can check out in this video. Make sure to subscribe for more content on tech and their ability for both productivity and gaming. I'm your host Naka, have a nice one. I've had the Zealios for years. I got out of the hobby and came back to try them out again.